It just happens when it happens that the child has, and I forget, what is it called,
It's
that
called the
moment?
sensitive periods.
The sensitive period, yes.
Yeah.
Tell us about what this is, because I think this is so important for us to realize. Like, I don't know, when we're growing up with a in a more traditional system, you think of learning kind of really basically, like, we give you this information, you take it in, and that's that, and then we test you on it and whatnot. Like, we just kind of imagine that kids are this, like, sort of like receptacles for this information, and that's how we learn. But that's not really true. And you talked, like, the whole idea of, like, interest increases your intelligence, right? Like, when you're interested, you're really, it increases how much you're going to learn it. And so tell us about these sensitive periods. That I always forget what that is called.
No, that's okay. And it's really useful because that's the reason that Montessori works. Because if no, every child didn't have sensitive periods to learning language or to learning mathematics, then you would have to force the information in. But Dr. Montessori noticed that children just naturally become interested in these things during certain periods. And it's going to differ for every child, but there's some guidelines. So if the child's like language really starts from birth right through to in the first 6 years, and you can think of a baby who's starting, they can make the sound of any language in the world, and then by 8 months just the sounds that they hear around them. So so the sensitive period, they're sucking it in, they're like absorbing, taking from their environment like a sponge, all of the words and vocabulary, and making them into sentences by the time that they're 3 years old. So it's amazing. So this sensitive period meant that you didn't have to sit down a 2-year-old and give them grammar lessons, did you? You didn't say, dad is sitting on the chair. You just said the words, and gradually they might say dad sit chair, and then they started getting and conjugating all of the verbs as they went along. And so by the same principles, a child who may be interested in reading, they might not be interested in reading when they're 3. They might not be showing any interest in 4. They're doing a lot of indirect preparation, learning from left to right and lots of things like this about crossing the midline, but they're not interested in reading. So we're reading to them, we're exposing them to language, they're involving them in conversation. And then one day when they're 5 or 6 or 7 and they start showing interest in saying, oh, what does that say? Oh, look at this. That says bird. That's the letter my name starts with. Then you realize, oh, they're in a sensitive period for reading right now. And then you can really follow this spark their interest, and you start showing them all of the beautiful hands-on materials that there are for learning to read. There's beautiful sandpaper letters where they can touch this rough surface of like the letter A, and then they hear A and they see A. So it appeals to visual learners, kinesthetic learners, oral learners, and so many different ways. And then what I love about Montessori as well is you scaffold the skills on, so that there's not just like one day you have to learn the whole word. You've been building these little skills all the time, and then one day they go cat, and they realize that they actually can read the word. Because actually in Montessori they learn to write before they read, which I also think is really fun as well, because children can learn the beginning sounds k, and then they get a letter a, and they use a movable alphabet to spell it out, and then t. But if you ask them what it spells, then there's another step, which is to synthesize it. So actually they can write little letters to you just by manipulating these hands-on materials to write k at t. They don't even need to be able to write the letter yet, because you're giving them the materials that if they can make a sentence before they're even ready to read. So there's sensitive periods for language, there's sensitive periods for maths, there's sensitive periods for order, and lots of things like this. And knowing that your child will come to it when their sensitive period is activated means you can relax and trust that the child will learn when they're ready.
Catch new episodes of the Mindful Mama podcast and other free resources, including the Mindful Mom Guide at mindfulmamamentor.com. You can listen to every back catalog episode, including interviews with Dr. Dan Siegel, Janla Van Zandt, Sharon Salzberg, and get meditations, join our private Facebook group, and more. Go to mindfulmamamentor.com now. I'll see you there.